Hey, how's it going today? I'm Skitty Beans, and today we're going to be watching an Alcatraz prisoner's meal. This is with one of our favorites, Tasting History with Max Miller. So I'm pretty excited to see this one. I actually have no concept of what prisoners ate, let alone, um, especially for Alcatraz. I feel like this could be kind of interesting. So I'm excited for this one. If you do get a chance, I would appreciate if you could leave a like and subscribe. It would help me out a bunch. And I have Max's video linked in my description below, so be sure to go and subscribe to him, watch his videos. He makes a lot of really good stuff. So, all right, let's get into it.
Alcatraz, one of history's most notorious prisons, housing criminals like Al Capone and Machine Gun Kelly, was also infamous for its food. Yes, as heinous as the reputation for the prison was, at least dinner on the Rock was something the inmates could look forward to.
This actually doesn't look bad. Is this what he's gonna make? This looks pretty good, in my opinion. I I would eat this today.
So thank you to Bright Sellers for sponsoring this video as
What is the Pokemon we have behind us? I don't know what that one is. It looks cool though. Looks very cool.
we recreate a dinner on Alcatraz, this time on Tasting History.
I love his
So
intro.
there are several menus from Alcatraz from the 1940s and 50s, and when I looked at them, I saw something I didn't really expect, and that's that the inmates ate pretty well. For example, in 1946, in September, on one random Monday dinner, which was actually the midday meal, they had split pea soup, roast shoulder of pork, sage dressing, brown gravy, mashed potatoes, stewed corn, apple pie, and bread and coffee with milk.
This sounds delicious. I want this today. The rest of this menu really doesn't look all bad though. This all looks pretty good. Split pea soup, Boston baked beans, tomato ketchup, was a boot and onion, canned pears, bread and coffee, baked meatloaf, pan gravy, steamed potatoes, spinach with bacon. All of this sounds good. None of this sounds bad, in my opinion.
Not bad. And the food was
Yeah.
supposed to be pretty good because not only was it for the inmates, but the guards ate it as well. Now, there are no
Ah.
recipes from the kitchens at the time, but as it happens, in 1952, the Alcatraz Women's Club, which were the wives and families of the guards and other people living on the island, they put together a cookbook of dishes that were served there. So using those recipes, I'm going to make a full meal fit for an inmate, albeit a smaller meal than that random Monday dinner.
I'll be honest, I didn't even know that this cookbook even existed, that this was a thing. This is pretty cool though. I wonder what else is in there. I bet it's all good food too. Oh, I bet it's all delicious.
Make Mrs. Viola Delmore's stuffed pork chops, Mrs. Mildred
Mm.
Keppel's cucumber salad, and Mrs. Ruth Langley's quickie apple pie. So for the pork chops, she says cut pockets in chops and fill with mixture of half cup breadcrumbs, half cup chopped apple, and 1 teaspoon minced onion. Season
Doesn't sound too bad. It really doesn't. That sounds pretty good.
with salt, pepper, and sage. Fasten with picks. Bake in moderate oven 350 degrees, about 1 hour. Now you want fairly thick pork chops, at least an inch, so you can slice a deep pocket in the chop almost enough to slice it in two. Then in a bowl, add your half cup of dried breadcrumbs and a half cup of finely chopped apple and 1 teaspoon of minced onion and some chopped sage. Plus about a quarter teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of pepper. Mix all
This seems like it'd be a really good combination. I love pork chops and applesauce. I think that's really good.
of that together and then stuff it into the pork chops. And the finer your ingredients are, the easier it will be to stuff your chops. Then
That makes
fasten them
sense.
shut with toothpicks, set them on a lined baking sheet, and put them in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 175 Celsius.
God, it sounds so good. I haven't eaten yet today, so this is gonna make me hungry. Why do I do this to myself?
Now, Mrs. Viola Delmore says to bake these for 1 hour, and I can tell you that is way too long. You're going to have some dry chops. I would say almost about half that time, like 30, maybe 35 minutes should do you pretty good. But that is still plenty of time to have a glass of wine, and I'm not talking that rank prison wine. No, I'm talking a nice glass of wine from today's sponsor, Bright Sellers. Now while you sip your wine and your pork chops bake, you can get started on your cucumber salad. good to have a little bit of vegetables with your dinner, especially if you don't get a lot of exercise time in the yard. So for Mrs. Mildred Keppel's cucumber salad, she says to whip evaporated milk until stiff, add vinegar and sugar to make a sweet sour dressing, add a dash of paprika and salt, pour over sliced cucumbers and onions. So
This doesn't sound too bad. I don't think I've ever made a salad dressing with evaporated milk, though. That's new.
took a can of evaporated milk and I whipped it for a
Oh,
long time, like 20 or 25 minutes, and I had expected it
oh.
to get to the consistency of like whipped cream, and it did not. It frothed up and it did get thicker, but not really like whipped cream like eggs.
Is it 20 to 25 minutes he was doing this? Holy. God.
Did not. It frothed up and it did get thicker, but not really like whipped cream like I expected. But then she does say that you're supposed to pour it, so I guess I shouldn't be that surprised. I also wish that she was a little more specific with exactly how much vinegar and sugar you're supposed to use to make this sweet sour dressing. I started
True.
with a teaspoon of vinegar
Good point.
and then I added a tablespoon of sugar, but you might want to taste as you kind of go along because I ended up adding a little bit more of each of those to get a sweet sour dressing. Then add in about a quarter teaspoon of paprika and a quarter teaspoon of salt. Mix.
I wonder how sweet this comes out because evaporated milk is pretty sweet. I know I've used it for like dessert stuff, but I don't know about salad dressing, I guess. Or but yeah, I mean I guess it's like this is like a salad dressing essentially. So I'm I am a little curious to know how that kind of tastes.
Sour dressing. Then add in about a quarter teaspoon of paprika and a quarter teaspoon of salt. Mix all of this together and set it aside. Then slice up a couple of cucumbers and an onion, then mix those together and pour the dressing over them and toss it until it is coated. So that is two of the three
It looks
dishes we're
good.
going to make, and the last one is a quickie apple pie, and it really is a quickie. But before we get to dessert, I wanted to share with you the most funny, if that's the word for it, recipe in the book. The thing is, it's not really funny like ha ha, it's more funny like eh eh.
Oh,
It's Mrs.
no.
Robert Murphy's recipe for well-bred children. Take
What?
one large grassy field.
Well, well-bred children. What in the world is this title? Bro, what is this title?
A half dozen children, 2 or 3 small dogs, and a pinch of brook and some pebbles. Mix the children and dogs together and put them in a field. Stirring constantly, pour the brook over the pebbles, sprinkle the field with flowers.
Is this
Spread
supposed to,
over
this just
all
has
a
to be a
deep
joke.
blue sky
This has
and
to be a
bake in the
joke.
sun. When brown, set to cool in a bathtub. What the? What even is that? Are you okay, Mrs. Robert Murphy?
It's gotta be
Maybe
a
living
joke.
on a
gotta
prison
be a
island
joke.
just isn't really good for one's psyche. And she was the wife of a guard. Just imagine the effect that it had if you were an inmate.
Oh gosh.
The island of Alcatraz, once the site of a military prison, became a federal penitentiary in 1934, and by 1937 had earned the nickname Uncle Sam's Devil's Island. And being an island, it was rather small for a federal penitentiary, only being able to hold 336 prisoners, and typically only housed about 275. But
Okay. I thought for some reason in my mind I thought it was bigger. I thought they had more room than that, but I mean like 375 is still quite a bit, but for some reason I thought they housed more than that.
336 prisoners and typically only housed about 275. But they were 275 of the most notorious and dangerous criminals in the country, like Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and the Birdman of Alcatraz, who ironically was not allowed to have birds while at Alcatraz. But most of the prisoners were really not famous. They were there because they were extremely violent and very often rule breakers that weren't able to live in the other prisons without trying to escape. It was notoriously difficult to escape from Alcatraz.
Yeah. I mean, because it is surrounded by water. Didn't they have like a bunch of attempts and like a lot of people died trying to escape from Alcatraz, I think. Like that, right? I mean, it looks serious. This place looks serious.
The facility was maximum security, minimum privilege, but food was not considered a privilege. As an inmate on Alcatraz, you had 4 rights: medical care, clothing, shelter, and food. And of those 4, the food had the best reputation. This was in a large part due to the prison's first warden,
I actually didn't know anything about this part of it. I've seen like some uh like ghost hunting videos where they go to Alcatraz. But I actually don't know a ton about the prison itself, like stuff like this, like the fact that they were known for their food. I had no idea. So this is pretty cool, some cool history. I'm learning here.
Best reputation. This was in a large part due to the prison's first warden, James Saltwater Johnston. Saltwater because he was as salty as the water that surrounded the island. He
Oof.
set some of the rigid rules that gave the prison its reputation for the next 3 decades. For the first 4 years, he employed a rigid rule of silence, which prohibited inmates from speaking in the cell blocks, at work, and even in the mess hall. But the warden wasn't all for punishment just for punishment's sake. Rather, he was all for punishment as a way to keep order. And that's why he wanted good food, because he felt that bad food led to disorder, led to prison.
Oh, I mean, I don't think that thinking is so wrong though, because have you ever eaten something that was bad? You're not very happy afterwards. That's for sure. So I don't, I actually can't really disagree with this thinking because I guess if they're well fed, then maybe they would be more well behaved as what most well behaved as they could probably be, right?
Food because he felt that bad food led to disorder, led to prison riots. So if there was good food, there'd be order. And not only
Plus, I feel like it would give them something to look forward to, right? Like you're in prison for whatever reason, whether you're like a heinous monster or something, not as violent or whatever, but you're there because you know, kind of a light risk. But I would imagine that if your food was really good and you were risking maybe not being able to eat some of like some meals or whatever because you're acting out, um, I could potentially see that working in his favor for sure.
was the food good, but he allowed the inmates to have as much as they wanted. But
Oh,
you had to eat what you took. We fed the inmates cafeteria style. They'd go in and put their food on a tray. You have to eat what you take. If you leave any, you don't eat the next meal. Then you
mm.
go and sit 10 to a table, 5 facing 5. They had about 20 minutes to eat. A guard stood at the end of every table. The reason for the watchful eye was because the mess hall could be one of the most dangerous places in the prison. First of all,
True.
it was one of the few times when all of the inmates were gathered together and they had access to spoons, forks, and knives.
Oh yeah, like this could be like a recipe for disaster. Although this is, I mean, as strict as these rules are, though, it really doesn't sound like a bad plan. And you get to get as much food as you want as long as you eat all of it. So I guess then they learn portion control, I guess, to some extent, right? But I would imagine if this food is that delicious, which I mean, like from the picture that we see of what he makes looks delicious. Um, I could totally see that working out and maybe not having, a whole lot of issues when it came to mealtime.
Gathered together and they had access to spoons, forks, and knives for eating. And at the end of the meal, they had to take all their silverware and put them in precise places on their tray so that the guard could count them, make sure nothing was missing. Even so, the mess hall every year was the scene of several small riots. Tables would be flipped, and silverware, along with hot coffee, would be used as weapons against the other inmates
Oh,
and
man.
against the guards present. But there were ways of quickly putting down a mess hall riot. First of all, the mess hall was sometimes referred to as the gas chamber because there were 14 canisters of tear gas in the ceiling that could go off with a remote control.
Oh my god. Can you imagine that, though? Like, there's everyone's getting all chaotic and then the tear gas comes out? Oh gosh, yeah, I'd be like, "No, I'm good, bro, I'm good. I just wanna eat my food."
Of tear gas in the ceiling that could go off with a remote control. But that usually didn't happen. They didn't need to take that kind of action because most of the guards outside of the hall were carrying Tommy submachine guns, and so a few little rat-a-tat-tats and, order was restored. But
I I would imagine, and I would imagine everybody has some hearing damage. I mean, That place doesn't look like it probably it got I bet that was so loud. Ooh.
And so a few little
Thompson's looks so
rat-tat-tats
cool though.
and, order was restored. But most days, no rioting took place at all. And when the inmates got up, the guard counted the silverware, a knife, fork, and spoon for every man, and then they all went out. The
Hmm.
officers ate the same food. So as strict as the setup was, the food was pretty good. In fact, it was often considered the best in the entire US prison system at the time.
Oh wow, that's really impressive. I didn't know this either. I wonder what like what other typical food was for prisoners like around that time. If they're considered the best, I wonder what was like the worst and what was like a average meal food menu situation.
Often considered the best in the entire US prison system at the time. One former inmate recalled the food at Alcatraz was as good as you would get in a good restaurant that specialized in home cooked meals. Better than most. And so, what
Oh,
were some of these restaurant worthy meals? Well, breakfast included things like applesauce, fresh oranges, shredded wheat, and hot griddle cakes with honey.
pretty good.
Dinner always came with a soup like split pea, potato chowder, or minestrone, then had an entree of meatloaf, corned beef, or breaded rock cod, along with sides like coleslaw, fresh green beans, or corn on the cob.
This all sounds good. They are eating good. They're eating better than me now. Damn, I'm kind of jealous.
Then supper in the evening would see the same soup from dinner along with another entree like meat croquettes with bechamel, spaghetti
Oh,
with meat
wow.
sauce, or jambalaya. Then a dessert like
Oh,
cupcakes or even apricot pie. I gotta say, I was pretty shocked at the variety, and it seems that the food needed to be presented in a pleasing looking manner. And then later on, starting around the 1950s, the menu actually had to be worded in a way that made the food enticing. The June
that's
peas
pretty
was an
true.
excellent choice, and this trick of menu making should be exploited as much as possible when certain foods are in season. Other words that come to mind are baby, young, milk-fed, spring, new, fresh, native, various colors such as mashed yellow turnips, cold such as chilled tomato juice, old-fashioned, homemade, etc. The title of a dish can do much in creating anticipation.
Oh, so he's even doing some psychological shit with them. I get it. I get it. That's smart. That's smart. Good thinking. Good thinking.
That was the supervisor of culinary operations at the prison. Though all of this, the good food and the pleasing descriptions, was only if you behaved, if you followed the rules, because should you break the rules and find yourself in solitary confinement, then you could expect to get for breakfast a half bowl of milk and cereal, a half bowl of soup with 4 slices of bread for dinner, and the same for supper.
Oof. Yeah. Can you imagine if you were naughty and then this is what you had to look forward to? I bet this probably kept people in line. I just this alone, you know, because if you compared it to like what they were eating pretty good, and then you cause problems and you're naughty, and then you get to eat this. I think this probably changed the tune for a lot of them, for sure.
Though on Thanksgiving, even those in solitary got a full Thanksgiving dinner, pumpkin pie
Oh
included.
wow.
Now, while that may seem a small amount of food, it was actually a lot better than most of the prisons at the time. Because, yes, it was a meager ration, but you still got 3 meals a day in solitary, where a lot of other prisons were giving 2 or even 1 a day to some
Oh.
prisoners. At Alcatraz, there was actually a concerted effort to stop.
Well, I mean, if the other prisons though had really crappy food, then maybe that one meal a day was like a was like a compromise. They're like, oh, food's terrible here. I'm glad I only have to eat it once a day. You know?
To some prisoners. At Alcatraz, there was actually a concerted effort to stop corporal punishment, including restricting someone's food. So rather than harming the body through lashings or cold hoses and stuff like that, they sought to damage the will and the spirit of the inmates, which I guess was an improvement. But it led to many of the inmates describing Alcatraz as the toughest, hardest place in the world, the mausoleum of the living dead.
I can kind of see this side of it though. I unfortunately I think a psychological warfare sometimes is you almost would rather take a beating, right? Like 'Cause it seems like a lot of times, like, some places when they talk about, like, uh, psychologically, it was, like, destroying them, and they were like, "I'd rather them just, like, beat the crap out of me instead." So, this is, this seems like it's kind of, like, falling under that kind of realm of, like, they are definitely breaking these men psychologically, but then I guess if it makes them behave, then that's probably their goal, right? Like, it really wasn't to, like, help them, it was how do we keep them in line and how do we have, everybody kinda behave themselves.
Hardest place in the world, the mausoleum of the living dead, lifeless automatons on the rock of despair. Some
Oof.
sources actually say that a way to break the spirit was by feeding them well. There were times when inmates would be receiving upwards of 5,000 calories a day, and they received very, very little exercise, so they became lethargic. Nobody wants to start a prison riot after a big old mountain of
Oh, so it's making them all fat and lazy. Uh, that is probably one strategy, right? If they're too fat and tired to fight each other, let alone riot, then you probably have a pretty well-behaved prison going.
they became lethargic. Nobody wants to start a prison riot after a big old mountain of mashed potatoes.
Although 5,000 calories a day, I mean, depending on, especially if they aren't getting any physical activity and they're probably not, huge men, I would assume, like, you probably got a lot of, like, average sized men. 5,000 calories, that's a lot of food in a day. I would imagine a lot of them really packed on the pounds pretty quickly.
That's why, rather than the prison, Alcatraz, using food as a punishment, it was the inmates who used not eating food as a way to protest against bad conditions in the prison.
Ah.
There were several hunger strikes on Alcatraz. Warden Johnson said of one that, so far as I can judge, at this moment, the men seem to be making their annual bid for attention, and perhaps came to the conclusion that striking was not the way to do it, but going without food, a la Mahatma Gandhi, would be a better sort of protest. You know he didn't pronounce it Gandhi. Now, yes,
True. You know he didn't. Facts.
would be a better sort of protest. You know he didn't pronounce it Gandhi. Now, yes, the prisoners would use food as a way to protest, but if that food quality suffered, then they would protest, or rather riot, about that as well. One of the most famous incidents was in 1950, and it was called the Spaghetti Riot.
The spaghetti riot. Oh, snap. Sounds scandalous.
Now, spaghetti was nothing new to the menu at Alcatraz, but in 1950, the quality of that spaghetti started to diminish over and over, every single week a little worse, until finally one inmate called it noodles with plum sauce. And another inmate basically said, if we see this on the menu again, we're flipping tables, we're going to start a riot.
Oh.
Next week, there was the spaghetti. So a riot broke out, putting the lives of the guards in the mess hall in danger. But the guards on the outside still had those Thompson submachine guns. I jammed that actuating lever back and she went click. Everybody heard it and knew what it meant. You look at that big muzzle staring down in there and it's just like staring down the mouth of a cannon. I said, "Lieutenant, blow your whistle." The inmates started to get up and walked out of the cafeteria just like lambs.
Damn. That's a pretty savage entry, though. Damn. That is, I mean, he's doing his job, but holy, that is a that is a good little entry there.
Now, spaghetti riots aside, working in the kitchens was actually one of the most coveted jobs at Alcatraz. Up to 10% of the prison population worked in there at any given time. Partly it was because when you were a cook, you got to take a daily shower, which not everyone did. Also, they tended to be treated better by the guards. First of all, they were making the food that the guards were going to eat, and second of all, they were the most trusted of inmates. They were just given a job that had knives. And early on, before the 1950s and regulations kind of tightened, they had a lot of freedom in what they were making and would even make special little dishes just for themselves, just for
That's actually kinda cool. I like that. I would imagine it's a little bit scary, trying to make a kitchen full of convicts, but, I mean, we still have that today, right? Like, I'm pretty sure that we still got, people that are in jail and they cook, so but this I mean, they should be treated better. I can see that, so they don't, I don't know, try and kill you or poison you since the guards are eating that food too. But I do kinda like that they gave them a little bit of, like, creativity for their own meals. That's actually kinda cool.
They were making and would even make special little dishes just for themselves, just for the kitchen crew. Former public enemy number one Alvin Karpis, nicknamed Creepy Karpis, went to
Ugh.
work in the kitchens in 1943 where he'd bake himself and his friends all sorts of special little pastries, and with access to yeast and fruit would whip up batches of prison wine. He was actually written up in 1945 when he was found staggering around the yard drunk on his own brew. But
Ah, this is like the famous toilet wine. Ugh, this sounds bad. Or hooch, right? Is that what it's called? Hooch?
found staggering around the yard drunk on his own brew. But he was not the only one. Many of the inmates would take out scraps of potato peelings or little pieces of fruit and yeast and would make their own wines and other batches of who knows what in other parts of the prison. In
I feel like this probably tasted disgusting, but I guess the taste doesn't matter, right? You're just trying to get drunk, but I don't know. It sounds kind of gross.
fact, they would take little matchboxes and fill them with baker's yeast and sell them to prisoners who didn't work in the kitchen for $5 a pop. Now, there are a
Oh, that
multitude
seems
of
like a
reasons
lot.
why in 1963, after 29 years in operation, Alcatraz closed as a prison. But the number one reason was cost. It was 3 times as expensive to house an inmate at Alcatraz than pretty much any other prison, because everything on that island had to be brought over from San Francisco by boat.
Ah, yeah. That I would imagine that probably gets expensive real quick. Yeah, I guess like how far away from the mainland they are. So how long is it, like a 2-hour boat trip one way, or because that I'm sure that all of that adds up probably real quick, especially if they're coming, what, I would imagine weekly, because they have all this fresh fruit and everything. So this it's got to be like a weekly thing, which that's got to be way expensive.
Every gallon of water, every bag of flour, and every apple, like the 6 apples that you'll need to make this quickie apple pie. Now, there are a few things that Mrs. Ruth Langley cuts out to make this apple pie quickie, but the most quickie making thing of the apple pie is that there is no crust. She says to take 6 tart apples.
Oh, so this is like a apple pie filling, right? And then so then it's quick. Fair
Quickie
enough.
making thing of the apple
I
pie
bet
is
it's
that
still good
there is
though.
no crust. She says to take 6 tart apples, then peel and cut them into slices, then place them in a deep pie pan and cover with cold water. Then you set that pan on the stove and bring it to a boil for about 5 minutes. While it boils, take 3/4 cup or 90 grams of flour and 1 cup or 200 grams of sugar and whisk them together. Once the apples are boiled, spread the flour and sugar over the top, pressing it down until juice comes up to cover the top, but don't mix it into the apples. I guess this is her version of a crust. Then take about 2
Ah,
tablespoons
okay.
of butter in little pieces and dot the top, then sprinkle that with cinnamon and pop it in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 175 Celsius for 15 to 20 minutes or just until the top starts to brown. And that's it. That is your 3 dishes. So add a cup of coffee or tea and a slice of bread, and you got yourself a dinner fit for an inmate.
I thought the apple pie was potatoes, like scalloped potatoes. Now I know. This still looks good though. Tasty.
Coffee or tea and a slice of bread, and you got yourself a dinner fit for an inmate at Alcatraz prison. It looks pretty good, except for the apple pie. Apple pie does not look good, but it actually smells really good. Smells like an
I
apple
bet it
pie.
does.
So maybe it's just not the prettiest of things. But I'm going to start with the pork chop. Here we go.
Oh, I bet it's good. Tasty?
Yeah, I overcooked that pork.
Uh-oh.
Still good though. Tastes good.
Dry.
Even 35 minutes was too long on the pork. I don't know what she's doing for an hour. Even
Well, I guess what kind of oven is she using for an hour? Because is she cooking like 20 at a time? Because maybe that takes a little longer. I don't know. But it kind of sucks when I've done this with pork chops or like I've overcooked them and they are dry AF and I usually if I mess up that way then I will usually just get some applesauce and it seems like that helps.
was uh, was too long on the pork.
This sounds
I don't
good
know what she's
though.
doing for an hour. Even if it was a huge pork chop, it's just way too
True.
long. But the flavor is really good because there's nothing particularly special about the pork chop. It's pork chop. But the stuffing is really nice. There's just a little bit of spice there from the pepper, but the sweetness of the apples is really what comes through. It tastes a
Mm.
lot like a stuffing, I guess, with the breadcrumbs, because
Oh yeah.
with the
Sounds
apples
good.
giving moisture to the breadcrumbs, what went in as sort of a dry filling is now
Mm.
nice and stuffingish. It's good. Now, I have to admit, I'm a little more worried about the cucumbers here with onions. Let me get an onion.
I I definitely agree with this because it seems this dressing seems interesting. I wonder if it's gonna be either too sweet or it's gonna be like kind of like an odd combination of like this really sweet dressing with cucumbers and onions. I don't know. I don't know. But I guess we'll see.
But here we go.
Hmm?
Hmm,
Not bad?
it's not bad. You get that
Oh,
sweet
okay.
and tangy kind of sourness of the dressing. I wish I had added more paprika. I think that would just kind of liven it up. The main flavor is still the onion and the cucumber. I think the onion just kind of overpowers the cucumber. But it's nice and refreshing and would probably be a welcome thing to be eating if you spent your entire day inside of a cell.
That's probably true
Finally, on
too.
to the part that I'm most excited
That
about,
is a good point.
this quickie apple pie, because it smells really, really good. It almost looks like some of the apples kind of totally disintegrate into like an applesauce, but then some of the apples are still kind of whole. And it does look kind of like a crust on top, kind of.
It kind of looks like cheese. I think that's why, or like the white sauce when you make scalloped potatoes. Like that's what it looks like to me. That's why I thought it was that. But I wonder if it's gooey though, since it's not really a crust. I wonder if it's kind of like soggy gooey. But I would assume that it probably still tastes good. I mean, I can't see this tasting bad, and I guess you have to think too. These are prisoners that are eating this, so I'm sure they thought it was delicious. Either way.
And it does look kind of like a crust on top, kind of. We'll give it to Miss Langley.
It's gotta be good.
That's delicious.
Yeah.
It tastes like apple pie. It tastes
Nice.
like just the filling though,
Mm.
because I guess that's kind of all it is. But I didn't think it would be quite as good as it is because you're not mixing the apples with the spices and the sugar and everything.
Oh, I wonder if this was kind of like cinnamon apples. So, I mean, it's kind of like apple pie filling, but I think it's a little bit less sweet, and you don't put it in a pie or anything. It's like you just usually eat it on its own. I wonder if it was kind of like kind of like that, where it's probably like a little bit sweeter, so it's more like apple pie filling, but somewhere in between of like apple pie filling and cinnamon apples is like kind of the vibe I'm getting.
As good as it is because you're not mixing the apples with the spices and the sugar and everything. That's all just going on top. But I guess when it's in the oven, it all kind of melts down through it and flavors everything really nicely. Nice and soft. That's good. It's
Good.
like apple pie pudding.
That doesn't
So
sound
if
bad
ever I
either.
was in Alcatraz, that apple pie pudding, quickie apple pie, that would be something I would definitely go back for, and I would clean my plate for that. Everything else about Alcatraz kind of sounds horrible, but But that's good.
That's probably
So, I
true.
mean, nothing here is like, oh, you gotta go make this. But it is cool to eat foods that they would have eaten, in the world's most notorious prison or one of them. But
Yeah,
if you are in need of an apple pie and don't want to make an apple pie, make this quickie apple pie. It's actually quite worth it.
I like that. That's pretty cool. That's 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 pretty cool. I do think that that's like a fair assumption to make too. Like I don't think we need to go out and make this, as like a whole dinner thing situation, but quick apple pie definitely sounds good.
And I will see you next time on Tasting History.
I thought this was a great video. I learned a lot, and I had no idea that Alcatraz was known for its food. Who knew? Definitely not me. But this was great. This was an awesome, awesome video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really appreciate you guys being here. Um, be sure to go and subscribe to Tasting History with Max Miller. He does great work, so be sure to go subscribe to him, watch his videos, all that good stuff. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next one.